Well, good evening, everyone. This is Sandi Craig,
And this is Sandi.
and my camera is really off.
Yeah.
All righty
Well,
then. It's good to have you all with us tonight in Walking in Spirit in Truth, and it's good to be with you. And so here we are. Boy, this is just not right. What do I need to do?
I don't know. Move this way or that way. No, don't do that. That doesn't work.
Guess I'm just going to have to be right here.
Okay. Well, we want to welcome you to Walking in Spirit and Truth this evening. We are going to continue our study on Psalm 23. We're actually going to begin verse 4 this evening. And our names are John and Sandi Craig. And we have a congregation. We co-pastor a congregation here in Amarillo, Texas, called Life of Worship. We have activities throughout the week, but our specific Shabbat activities are 12 p.m. Central. We have our Torah study, 3 p.m. Central. We have our services. They're all on YouTube Live. You can look up John and Sandi Craig, Life of Worship. You'll get there. And let's see. And we have other programs that are on the radio. Anyway, we would love for you to join us and also become partners with us, donate. That would really bless us and help us in these times of need so that we can continue these ministries and reach out. Anyway,
hey,
that's enough of that spiel.
And immediately following Walking in Spirit and Truth is the Craig Report. You want to stay tuned for that. You can catch it on Messianic
Network.tv.
.tv. There we go. All right. Yes. Or over at Twitch. So we want to see you on the other side as well.
All
for
right.
the latest updates that you don't want to miss.
Yeah, you don't want to miss the news. If you want real news, this is where you get it. This is where you get it on this network. And specifically, the Craig Report is great. There are other great news shows on this network as well, but stay tuned because you want to know what's going on. Anyway, we're going to jump right in. We're going to go ahead and read Psalm 23, verses 1 through 4, and then we're going to focus in on verse 4.
Psalm 23, beginning with verse 1, a psalm of David. Yahweh is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. Though thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me.
All right. So before we begin the Hebrew breakdown of a lot of the words and get into that, I want to again come into this picture of what it's like to be a shepherd and the sheep and in real life and how they react and the journeys they may take along the way. And some of the information that I do gather is from Philip Keller, Psalm 23, A Shepherd's Point of View, because obviously Philip Keller is a real shepherd. So he's got a different perspective than most of us. Now, we may think that walking through a valley with steep cliffs and long treks may be difficult, and why would that ever happen? Well, in all actuality, a shepherd will normally lead his sheep up to through the high country, through valleys at certain times of year, to switch fields. We've talked about what happens if they stay in the field in one field for a long time, disease and over harvesting of that field, et cetera, et cetera. So it's natural and normal for long treks into the high country to occur. Usually it's in the summertime. And so, in fact, those sheep that don't get to go, the ones that are left behind, or maybe their shepherd doesn't know about the treks into the high country or these treks through valleys, et cetera, those are usually the sheep that seem neglected. And because they have to stay on the other side of the fence. It's a caring shepherd that makes these journeys. It's a caring shepherd that takes his sheep along. So we actually see in Israel, as well as in Western sheep ranches, this division coming every year. In summer, they graze here. In winter, they graze here. That sounds sort of like people who winter in one part of the country and summer in another part of the country. It sounds sort of like that. Well, maybe these sheep are on this same sort of journey anyway. But most efficient sheepmen, they take their flocks into distant summer ranges during the summer. And that often entails a long drive. Not a short one, a long one. And so what happens, because the grounds can be treacherous, because the footing is not always stable, the sheep move slowly and they work their way up through the mountain. And in Western cultures and things like that, it's behind receding snow. And by late summer, oftentimes in certain parts for shepherds, the alpine meadows above the timberline is where they're all resting and grazing, et cetera, et cetera. Now, when fall comes around, that it shifts, because now snows are going to settle in the highest ranges, and so the flock is brought back down to their normal home, to normal elevations. And by the end of the year, as fall passes, the sheep are driven to their headquarters, and that's where they will spend the whole winter. So this segment of yearly operations is described actually here. During this time, the flock is entirely alone with the shepherd when they're grazing in these other fields. It's very intimate. It means that shepherd cares. It's a one-on-one with the shepherd and with the flock. There's nobody else there. There's nobody else to rescue. There's nobody else to do. It's just between the shepherd and the flock. So there's this intimacy, and that you actually see reflected in the psalm, in the language and in the pronouns, because it's I. It's terms that are far more intimate than previously. And you have that language. Now, we need to remember that all this is done where? In the backdrop, against mountains, against rivers, against meadows and high highlands. Now, I'm not just talking Israel. I'm talking in general for a shepherd when they make this trek. So if you say, well, that's not what this looks like, we're talking specifically about shepherds and sheep and that behavior and how a shepherd leads at these specific times of year right now. So don't forget that and try to compare, well, only Israel. We're not just talking about Israel right now. We're talking about everything as shepherds lead. So David understood a rough terrain. David understood the difficulties in moving the flock from point A to point B. He understood that. In fact, it's possible that when Samuel was sent to anoint him as king, that David was in one of these places, and that he up in the high country, up at where a trek had to be made. So it wasn't just like he was at the pasture next door. He could have possibly been further off, and he had to be sent for and literally make a journey trek home. And that's why some other shepherd had to take over the flock at the time. But in all of this, he did know the firsthand dangers. He knew the threats. He knew the natural threats. He knew the unnatural threats like predators. He knew poisonous plants. He knew all of these things, including weather. He was familiar with these circumstances, and he knew how to safeguard his flock as a shepherd. He knew the road to take. He knew what to do. And we need to remember that about our shepherd. He is already familiar with where we're going, as he knows where we've been, but he knows where we're going. It's not a surprise to him if something is along the way that might seem difficult for us. He already knew it was there. And so he takes care of us, but he's the one that's supposed to be leading, right? He's leading us in paths to him. He's leading us in paths to rest, which is he is rest. Now, if we have mountains, what are we always going to have? Valleys. Always. If we have a mountain, we're going to have a valley. It's just the way it is. So we sometimes hear that we get to experience the victory on the mountaintop, but then we go to the valley. Well, valleys and mountains are going to coexist. If you can't have one without the other, remember that. And oftentimes when you look at valleys with runoff and running water and time, the sides that lead up the mountain oftentimes can be scarred. There can be deep ravines. There can be gulches. There can be draws. And a shepherd would always say that the best way to the top is always through these valleys, because oftentimes the valleys will gently lead you on up. Think about going up the side of a steep mountain or even a 90-degree surface. How are you supposed to do that? or almost there. 45. I mean, think about this. Is it easiest to do that, or is it easiest to wind your way there? Think about that. So shepherds, they're familiar with all of these things. So they gently lead their flock. They persistently lead their flock up the paths, through the winding valleys. Sometimes they're dark. Sometimes they're treacherous. But there are other reasons why sheep are taken to the mountaintops. It's not just because the valley is the easiest way to get there. Oftentimes they're taken to the mountaintops by the way of valleys, because when you have a valley, you will often see creeks or rivers or some places with water in them. Some may be dry, but there's a greater chance where the sheep will be able to relieve their thirst through those valleys. If you're going straight up the side of the mountain, it's probably not going to happen. You're not going to see running water there or flowing water there. So one more time, we find refreshing water along the way when the shepherd leads his flock through the valley. You find him along the way as he leads you through those times when you have to completely rely on him, when you cannot rely on your own strength or your own wisdom or your own knowledge, because that will cause you to stumble and fall. The only way you will be sure-footed is when you were relying on him to lead you, because he knows the places that have the water, for he is the water and he knows how to quench your thirst. Now, there's a third reason why shepherds would choose to go via valley to reach the mountain, to reach the places through the end point of their journey. And that is because the richest land, the richest feeding area, the best forage is usually always found along the route or the route of the valley. So the flock, one more time, is moved gently. They're not hurried along. In fact, you can't do that because it's not a place where you can be sure-footed if you're running or moving quickly. It's a walk that's slow, that's calculated. And then you may have lambs. You may have newborns that are close to newborns, lambs that they've never been there before. They don't know the journey. So they have to be led. And the shepherd wants to be sure that they have everything they need. Yeshua wants to be sure that we have everything we need along the way when we follow him. But we have to follow him. We have to follow his ways. We have to trust in him and not by our own knowledge or what we see along. Oh my goodness, that grass looks good over there. Let me go over there. Oh, this is so hard. Why do we have to do this? Wouldn't it just be easy to stay where we're at? We've discussed all of that about this psalm and what that means for our lives. It means death. It means destruction. We can't do it. Though the valley floor itself may be dark, it may be shadowy, it may be treacherous, maybe the sun doesn't reach it very often, except for a few hours a day, he leads us that way for a purpose. Will also strengthen us. Think about the valleys that you've been in. Have they strengthened you or have they made you weaker? You go through the other side, they're going to have strengthened you. So the shepherd knows, because of his past experience, he knows where the predators are hiding. He knows where things like coyotes or bears or wolves or cougars are and how to avoid them. Maybe there would be rock slides or avalanches or other things that could happen along the way of the valley, but he knows where they are and he knows where to guide his sheep and how to protect them. He, in spite of all the hazards, he knows the best way to take his flock to the place of rest, to the place of nourishment, to the place where they need to be, that place of intimacy, where it's just him and them, him and the sheep. That's it. Now, we need to remember that for a sheep itself, a big threat are storms, whether it's sleet, whether it's rain, whether it's snow. Those storms that come along the way can easily cause the sheep to experience exposure, and ultimately the sheep would experience death. because they're thin-skinned creatures, absolutely easily susceptible to what? To colds and pneumonia and other respiratory conditions. That's what happens with the sheep. So the shepherd has to take more care than we could even understand to make sure that his sheep do not even face those elements that could bring destruction. Our shepherd wants to do the same if we allow him. But oftentimes, here's his covering and he's taking care of us. So if the storms come, he's still got us. But we say, oh, it looks good over there. And we walk out of his covering. And then we're in trouble. We walk through the valley of shadow of death. When you think about walk, generally we think, oh, we're just taking this leisurely stroll along the way. It's pretty easy. But that's not really what we're referencing here, because when you're going through places that are dangerous, everything you do needs to be calculated, needs to be led by the Spirit, needs to be led by Him. He will lead us. Now, when we think about what we talked about last week and the previous weeks, last week we were talking about the paths of righteousness and how He was directing us. And when we looked at the paleo, we understand that those paths that we go down are surrounded by what? They're surrounded by chaos. And here now we have a valley of the shadow of death. And it's a little narrow path once again. But that one path, that narrow way, is supposed to lead us to rest, to lead us to Him. But it is surrounded by chaos. It's surrounded by mountains and treacherous paths. And yet we have to go through those places, through the valley, and listen to His whisper. Even though chaos surrounds us, even though it tries to threaten us, we trust in Him. Maybe death is all around us. Maybe it is, but we still trust in Him. And we make sure that we don't detour, that we don't detract, that we don't follow another path along the way because it's easier, it's more comfortable, everyone else is there, whatever the excuse. We cannot do that. We cannot do that. Now, I want us to begin to look at this phrase in Hebrew. And the first words we're going to look at are gam ki, G-A-M space K-I. So when we look at this word or these words, we can, when you break it down, we're not breaking it into paleo quite yet, but it has this meaning of even though, but it could also mean a different phrase as well that's not translated. And that is truly because. It's going to depend on your context. Even though I walk, maybe it suggests that we may or may not walk through this valley of the shadow of death, but we are all going to walk in a valley. Okay. I think we're all going to experience those things personally. But when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, when we look at that, this word walk here is this imperfect form, and it's rendered into English as the future. Even though I walk, it has this future connotation to it. So when you put that phrase together, and let's use that phrase for gam ki, G-A-M-K-I. Truly because I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? Because even though we're going to pass through this place of the shadow of death, it suggests that there's a reason why we will fear no evil, and that it fits the context, which leads us actually into the next verse, because He's taking care of us. But let's see if there's more understanding as we look at the Paleo Hebrew of this phrase. Now, if you want to know how you say it in Hebrew, that whole first phrase, even though I walk, is gam kielech. G-A-M-K-I-E-L-E-K. And we're going to break it all apart. So you would have, if you did the whole phrase, Gimel, Mem, Kaf, Yod, Aleph, Lamed, Kaf. Okay. Hopefully you got that right. But we're going to go back to the even though, that Gimel, Mem root. Okay. That Gimel, Mem root. So let's look at the pictures of those in Paleo. That Gimel, which is that picture of a camel, it means to lift up, as we've spoken before, or to lift up the name of Yahweh. And then we have the Mem, which can be the chaotic waters that are destructive, like a tsunami. It can also be that gentle stream in the desert. It's this picture of waters that can be one or the other. And we also know that its number is 40, and that means trials and testing. So is it the tsunami? Is it the waters of chaos? Is it the waters that are destructive? Or is it the living water from Yahweh? I think it's going to depend on us on a lot of that. So you have those two letters. And you can, when you put that phrase together, you can have to lift up chaos, which that's what we want, right? We want chaos lifted up and removed from us, to be removed far from us. Now let's look at the word gam, gam, and that's number 1571. It's actually an adverb, and you may see it translated in some versions as yea. Maybe you don't see it as even though. Yea. In the King James Version, you're going to see yea. But here with this descriptive form, we know that something one more time is happening to the chaos that keeps coming up in this psalm. Why would it keep coming up in this psalm? Well, let's look at our lives. Does chaos seem to come up a lot in our own lives? Yes. I would say a resounding yes on that. And unfortunately, many of us just sit there in the chaos and do nothing when Yeshua, Yahweh, he is the way out of all of the chaos. So here we have this idea one more time of chaos. Now let's look at that key, that Kaf and that Yod. We have Kaf as the picture of this open hand, and it means to cover, to open, to allow, or even to atone. And its number is 20, which is the number of redemption. And the Yod is the picture, which we've had many times before, of that arm or that hand, and it means work or a mighty deed. When you put these together, you have lift up destruction and chaos and cover us, redeem us with his work and mighty deeds. That's one way. That's one way to look at it. I'm going to say that one more time. To lift up destruction and chaos and cover us and redeem us with his mighty work and deeds. I would say, amen, do that for me, Yah. I need that every day of my life. I need you to lift up and remove the chaos from me and cover me and redeem me, because you are the one who does mighty things and miracle power. You are the one with the righteous right arm and the mighty hand. So I would say aloud, amen. Please do that with me. Be my shepherd and do that as I walk. As I walk. Yea, though I walk. Even though I walk. Now, you can look at it a different way as well. You lift up chaos with that open hand of what's allowed. Okay, that sounds so confusing, doesn't it? Well, let's talk about it a little bit. So if you are walking in the strength of what's allowed, who's allowing it? It's basically following his instructions. Do what he says to do. When we're walking uprightly, when we're walking rightly, it's to do what is allowed. It is to stay in his boundaries. It is to walk and not just go any direction, to go in the direction that he's allowed. It's to have those borders that prevent me from getting off track. Well, what are the borders that prevent me from getting off track? It's his Torah. It's his instruction. He's written it down. If we would follow those things, we're not going to fall off track and go down those places where chaos can consume us. What he tells us what we can eat. He tells us how to worship. He tells us when to rest. He tells us how to live. He tells us how to deal with our money, how to deal with our family, how to deal with all the issues of life. But we ignore them or don't even take the time to figure it out. Destructive waters or the gentle rains, the living water. Which is it going to be? Which are we going to invite in? Because we know that the waters of chaos, the flood waters, they were chaos. We see Peter in the storm as he begins to drown and fall into the Sea of Galilee. When he took his eyes off Yeshua, there was a storm raging. There was chaos. But we also need to understand that those waters of chaos can be used as a tool of salvation to redeem us, as this phrase as also means. They can be used to save us from the chaos around us because we look to him. All right. Now, I want us to go forward a little bit more and look at halak or lech, this walk. Let's break it apart and see what it means in Paleo. So if we're walking through the valley of death, what are you doing? One more time, we've talked about it. Are you running? Are you hurrying? Are you rushing? Are you acting crazy as you're going through this valley? Absolutely not. You're walking cautiously. You're looking around. You're making sure things are what they're supposed to be. So halach, walk. One more time, the phrase gam ke'elech, even though I walk. This word halach, many of us already know. If you look at how halak is translated, it's like just in one version of the word in the NASB, it's translated 146 different ways. That's a lot. So what's the common denominator going to be? Well, breaking that word down in Hebrew, because the word is halak no matter what. Now, it may be translated 146 different ways, but those letters are going to tell us something. But we understand that halak is a journey with a destination, a simple walk even, possibly, to this destination. It's not a race. It's not a race. It's a normal journey. So from the beginning, Yahweh has this picture of the shepherd who keeps us from want. He has us on this life journey so that he can take care of us, so that he can lead us to rest. He's taking care of us as we trust him on the journey. And we need to pause. We need to stop on an occasion and rest because he is the supply. We've got to remember that. So let's break it down. Let's break it down in the Paleo and see what we come up with. Because this word halach, or elek in this case, is the aleph, lamed, and kaf. And this aleph is this picture of this strong leader. It's the picture of Yahweh. It's the picture of the Father. And then we have the lamed, that shepherd staff, that crook. And it means to control. It means to have authority, or that voice of authority. And then that kaf, one more time, we just talked about it, is the palm of the hand, and it's to cover, or to open, or to allow, or to atone. And also, because it's gematria, it's redemption, that number 20. So when you put these words together, here's what I see: that strength, or the strong leader, or the Father has control and authority to cover or to allow. I'm going to say that one more time. Strength, or the strong leader, or the Father has control and authority to cover or allow. Now, my mother has always raised me that when you get out from his covering, that you will face the storms and you will face the world without him, so to speak. Not completely without him, but you're going to face the elements for sure. And she always used this example. If the speed limit says 60, this dates us, doesn't it? If the speed limit says 60, if you go 62, then you are out from under his covering. And if things happen, that's on you. So one more time, and she would always do this, that picture I just gave you. Are we going to stay under his covering and submit to his authority? Or do we do it our own way? One more time. Many of us choose to do it our own way. Just for a minute. Oh, it's not going to take long. Just for a minute. Okay. So what is walking then? When you look at it a different way, it's what controlling strength allows. One more time. It's this picture that when I deviate off of his path, when I decide to go my way, I will face chaos. I will face weakness. I will face things that are out of control and ultimately even death. So let's put this phrase together. Lift up destruction and chaos and cover us and redeem us with his work and mighty deeds. When my strength comes from the things he allows, when he is the leader and he is in control, he will cover us. Yea, though I walk, even though I walk. It sort of leaves us with the Yetzer Hara or the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination or the evil inclination. Which one are we going to follow? What are we going to do? Lift up destruction and chaos and cover us, redeem us with his work and mighty deeds. When my strength comes from the things he allows, when he is the leader and he's in control, he's going to cover us. And you may say, well, I don't really understand that Yetzer Hara or the Yetzer Hatov. Well, it's rabbinic doctrine, and it has consequences in traditional and Jewish thought. And it basically says we have two inclinations or instincts. One is going to take us to him, and the other is going to bring us down. Which one are we going to choose? It's that battle that we have between the beast, the flesh, and the spirit. The one that has been going on since the sixth day, when beast was created first and man second. And within man, the flesh was created first and the spirit came second. That fight that we have within us. Who are we going to follow? Him? Us? When we follow us, we become the beast. When we follow him, we become human. We become the Adam, the Adam. All right. And we may even think or reference Paul, Shaul, because Shaul talks about his weakness. He talks about, hey, I have this thing that keeps bothering me that's a thorn in my flesh, and I want it to go away. I want it to leave me. Maybe I should take charge of the direction of my life. He asked the Father, he says, remove this from me because it bothers me. It's in the way of what I think you want to do with my life. But it doesn't happen. Maybe that thing that we call a weakness is the very thing that prevents us from getting off track. That thorn in the flesh keeps us from going our own way and building up pride and thinking we've got it all under control. So it actually becomes this part of the path that we're on. And he gets the glory because we realize the only way to get through it is through him. Because there's something in our life that isn't perfect or what we would consider perfect. But that very thing that we would consider an issue could possibly be the very thing that keeps us where we're supposed to be. We all have areas of weakness. We all face difficulties and wish things were different or better or things like that in our lives. But have we truly reflected? Have we truly thought about how important those very things might be to us? That we don't need to just get rid of them or Yahweh doesn't get rid of them on purpose because they play such an important part in our lives. Now that is against everything that we have learned and been raised with. Why? Because in Greek thought, any weakness is a flaw in character. Period. There's not grace on that. If there's a weakness, it's a flaw. It's a defect. It's a problem. You have an issue. In Greek thought, we need to be strong mentally. We need to be strong spiritually. We need to look good. We need to endure. We need to be perfect. That picture of perfection. I think about how often women try to attain that picture of perfection that's put up in front of us in the media, movies, billboards, TV, books, whatever you want to say. There is a visual picture of who we are supposed to be as women, and it's a facade. It's not real. But most women, or at least in the Western society, compare themselves to this false image, this Greek image of perfection. Any weakness is a defect. But here's what Yahweh does. He allows that weakness to give, and he gives it to us, or he allows it so that we will learn that this is part of the journey and we'll stay on his path. In the Greek world, what is beautiful is what's holy. But in Hebrew, what is holy is beautiful. If you look at the Greek statues, they are supposed to portray these images of perfection that have no defect, that have no thorn in the flesh, that becomes part of our journey, that becomes part of what keeps us on path. No, those are their images of perfection. But for Yah, a spoon, a vessel can become holy because of it's used for his purposes. So in Hebrew, what is holy is beautiful. These lessons that we learn through this psalm are so important to us, but they seem to go consistently. Speaking of, there's a world of chaos around us, and he is the way, he is the truth, he is the life. And we have to trust him where we're going. We have to walk with him. We have to be led by him to the place of rest, which is him. We have to follow his paths. And the paths were never promised to be easy. The paths were never promised to be this wide road where we can saunter at our own speed or run where we want to run. No, he wants us to completely rely and trust in him in all things. And because of that, we reach our goal. We reach what we desire. And our desire ultimately is him, because he is our rest. But it's all done through trust. And we are so glad that you've joined us this evening. We have part 2 of Walking in Spirit and Truth coming up. And we don't want you to miss it, because we're going to get updated on what's going on around the world, because you're not going to find it in listening to the television or to mainstream media in any form or fashion, or reading their news reports. The only way you're going to find it is through alternative sources, what the true truth of what's happening around us is. So if you want to be informed, stay tuned.
So put on your seatbelt and get ready, because we're going to have a good, well, I won't say we'll have a good time. We'll have an informative time. That's what we're going to do here on the other side here as we move over to the Craig Report. So you can watch us over at lamnetwork.tv, and you can also catch it at over on Twitch, whatever works for you. So catch us on the website. And by the way, that first screen on Lamb Network at the very top of the page, if it's not working, go down to the very bottom, because I think it's the Twitch feed is at the very bottom. One may work better for you, but you can also just go to your web browser, type in twitch.com, and then find lamnetwork.tv, and you can pull up there. So with that said, thank you for joining us for Walking in Spirit and Truth, and we will see you on the other side.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.